So I speak from a little bit of experience rather than learning. As last year we ran our 50-50 campaign in Generation Zero, which is all about getting a fair share for smart transport in New Zealand. And so we realised the issue was around funding for active transport, smart transport options, with something like the funding then, it's changed a little bit now, was $1 for new infrastructure for smart transport, again $30 for new highway infrastructure. So it's pretty disproportionate. We realised this was a huge issue. Now we ran a campaign based on this policy ask, and I can tell you that it's how not to campaign effectively from a grassroots perspective. And this was a really important lesson that we learned about how to not effectively campaign grassroots. Because it was a very high level policy ask, and it wasn't communicating exactly what we wanted people to do or to change. So we met with influencers, and they would say, well, where's your grassroots support? Like, give us the voting mandate that you guys are showing that you have for this to go in place. So this highlights to me that moving away from just advocacy into grassroots campaigning is effectively what we need to do, and what the cycling movement needs to do, and what the climate change movement is doing, and what Generation Zero is doing. So it's firstly about communicating right to the audience that you need to communicate to. And this audience, I quite like the 10% aspect that was highlighted before. And it's all about these early adopters. Because when you look at the building a movement, it's those early adopters and that 10 to 18% that you need to get to secure that cultural change within society. So holding that as the frame of reference, I guess moving forward, it's about making sure that we're communicating to this audience and making sure this audience is realising the benefits that it can from adopting cycling. So that's I guess the first step I say. I communicate, know your audience, know your community, and know what you want your community to do. Because that's what it comes down to with grassroots campaigning. It's what do you want your community to do, and those people, those early adopters. Maybe that's cycle, or maybe that's cycle every day. Maybe it's an easier ask than that. So secondly, it's about being purpose-driven, and that means doing purpose-driven stuff. Because what happens is within movements, you look effective, and people want to join effective organisations. And you can be effective at advocacy, but unless you're effective at and advocacy is brilliant, but you've got to tell the stories of advocacy. You've got to tell the stories of what's happening, what you're doing, in order for people to know that you're being effective. And not just, it's in some way can be an isolating community in some way, if you're just a cyclist on the inside. And it's also about communicating with that general public that you're a success. So what that means from a Generation Zero perspective, or what we learned 50-50, moving towards our next stage that we engaged with, which was our event called PowerShift New Zealand Pacific. So this was our large Climate Youth Summit event that we ran late last December, and it was a great success. We had 800 people at this event, and the network and the exposure that we had to the general public was the greatest benefit that we had as a grassroots organisation, because we had the most simple ask of any organisation to come to an event. But the crucial element to coming to the event was not realising that was the signal that they were either the audience, and then they came to the event, and that's what made them. It was journey mapping that process they got through. So when I say journey mapping, it's understanding that there are multiple levels of engagement when you're campaigning, and that you have your community who don't know anything about what you're doing, and they're the ones you need to communicate to. You get them into the audience, making them supporters, making them members, volunteers, and then the core team, which is effectively what we are here of the movement. And that disseminates out, and that organising model probably is effective because it understands that people need to move from an audience and a community, yeah, and they need to progress through each of these stages. And there are multiple different ways to do that. Now, I use PowerShift as an example because it's a really simple and clear way that we engage people through that process and through those levels of engagement. To attend PowerShift was effectively to be a volunteer. So that means they had to move from the audience and they had to learn about PowerShift, which was based on if you're a marketer, obviously say something you hear all the time, like you'll have to see something more than 5, 6, 7 times to understand it and get it. So that's instantly the first thing to do to make audience make a community audience. And then audience has to be effectively a direct engagement with. with somebody. They have to talk to somebody, they have to do something, they have to actively pursue that level of engagement to be part of that campaign. That gives the opportunity to then move from that audience and to that supporter into those members that are effectively sign up to come to the event, to show active participation, and have already engaged with you on that in that two-way relationship. And then coming to that event is making them a volunteer, and that allows you to move them into much greater roles that I feel like talking with Patrick and stuff before, it's been a little bit of a barrier, because the issue with being advocacy-based is that it's a high level of engagement, like I talked about, and people can't go from audience to high level of engagement and volunteers in court like that. It's a process, and it can be a long process, it can be a short process, but it needs to be a process nonetheless. And so this has meant that coming from an event like PowerShift and Generation Zero, we're able to say that we have 200 active community volunteers throughout the country actively engaging and pursuing new members of Generation Zero to build that movement, because in order to create that voting mandate for campaigning, that's what needs to be done. And then you can show that you can use that and go into a meeting with any political influencer and say, and they've already seen the other people in the community organising around getting people involved. It gives you so much more weight when talking to those influencers. So what can do? I guess the three things talking about is making sure that the communication is the right people in the right public, but also general enough that you're not just talking in isolation, which is something that I can tell from experience that we, Generation Zero, talk in isolation lots, and it was amazing to talk outside of that and see the response and the different ways that you need to communicate. That I guess one of the examples I bring up is, I'm obviously pretty young, and an argument that is always put forward for cycling is that health benefits are the best way, and they should be used. But I can tell you that when we pursued this graph, like organising from a young person's perspective in universities, that wasn't the main driver. It was the cost of travelling, and the cost of actually having to drive and use and to university and stuff. That was what made people shift, and that's what people come onto this campaign, rather than saying these long-term benefits, because there's something that it's effectively called loss aversion. People are much more likely to think about what they could gain or lose right then than this long-term thing that they could effectively gain, which is the health benefits, which I don't underestimate, but that's the audience communicating to, making sure that audience is communicated to in the right way in order to engage them to move through that level of engagement to effectively provide that mandate for change. So that's the first thing. Be purpose-driven, making sure that the activity you're doing is driven for that audience, and making sure that they feel effective, making sure they are effective. And thirdly, that most important one I was talking about, I guess it's the journey mapping that can do for people moving through those levels of engagement, because that's effectively what organising is about, and that's what needs to happen in order to build a movement for cycling to get this mandate for effectively to change the funding in New Zealand for a lot of transport options. So yeah, and this is what it means to be effective in a grassroots, and that's, I guess, my thoughts on what CAN can do and what CAN can engage with from a grassroots campaigning perspective. So I guess I'd ask, take that forth and make sure that when you're looking at when next to launch a campaign, making sure that is also a primary focus of how you engage with the general public, not just the interior cycling community.